Hebrews chapter 7. My dad used to buy tools, but the cheapest tools. Dad was a cheap tool kind of guy, and I think he figured as a weekend warrior he wouldn't be using the tool long enough to really need a good tool, so he would buy just the cheapest garbage tool you could find. And so when my dad passed away 10 years ago, guess what I inherited? A lot of garbage tools, you know? Now, I am a fan of cheap tools, primarily because they are cheap. Like, they don't cost a lot of money, and I'm in. But, usually you get what you pay for when you buy a cheap tool. I remember my dad always used to use a scissors jack, like the emergency jack that comes in the car. If he needed to jack his car up, he wasn't going to go buy one. So when I first discovered this thing called a floor jack that can make things a lot easier, I went out and, true to form, bought the cheapest floor jack that I could find. And about a year later, there was hydraulic fluid everywhere, and it was a piece of garbage in the dumpster. And so I went out and I bought a better floor jack, one that would last me, one that wasn't inferior. Now, having experienced, let's just say, the joy of a good tool like a good floor jack, why would I ever, if I had the floor jack, why would I ever go back to wanting to use the little emergency scissors jack that's in the back of the car? Why would I ever go backwards to something inferior? Once you have a better tool, it's difficult to go backwards. That is true in your garage. That's true in your kitchen. That's true in your workshop. That is also true about your priest. Once you have a better priest, why would you want to go backwards? There's one verse, I think, in our text today, and it would just be this. For the law of Moses in particular, for the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. But God appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. The writer of Hebrews today wants you to know your priest is weak. Your priests are cheap. They're inferior. Jesus, however, is a perfect priest. If you have placed your faith in him, he's your priest. Why would you want to go backwards to an inferior priest? Now, I can hear you right now saying, Dave, this is all great and everything, but I don't have a priest. Like, I don't have my personal priest on the side. You'd say, Dave, you're not my priest, and you are right. I am not your priest. Pastor Tank, although younger and better looking than me, is also not your priest. Our elders are not your priests. We don't have priests. But a priest is one who performs religious duties on behalf of another. A priest is a religious go-between. It is someone or something who tries to mediate the problem that we have with God, to bridge the obstacle or the gap between you and God. And so as evangelical Protestants, we don't have religious guys in robes who try to mediate our relationship with God. But you and I do have other kinds of priests in our life who mediate our deficiencies. We may not call them priests, okay? We don't use that. But it is true, nonetheless, we try to rely on other mediators to solve our problems. Now, what are these other priests? Well, we'll come back to that. For now, I would just tell you that it's true. Each one of us has a go-to priest, a mediator, someone we try to realize or rely on to mediate our problem. And if you don't realize that there are ways in which you look to other priests, people, or things to mediate your relationship with God, if you don't realize that, then you will muddle along in this brokenness and insecurity of feeling cold and distant from God. But God has made so much more available to you. Don't rely on these other inferior priests, mediators. You have a perfect mediator, a perfect high priest in Jesus. And if I have one thing for you today, that's it. Jesus is a perfect high priest. Stop looking to inferior priests. Jesus is the perfect high priest, So stop looking to inferior priests. We've been in Hebrews now. I think this is our 9th sermon in the book of Hebrews. So we're here, and we've got a ways to go still in this book. Hebrews is a New Testament book. It's in the back of your Bible. It was written 30 years after Jesus ascended into heaven. It was written for Jewish Christians living in Rome. And the basic message of Hebrews is don't go back, you Jewish Christians, don't go back to Judaism. Don't go backwards, because Jesus is better than anything you left behind. So he has said, as we marched our way through Hebrews, he said Jesus is better than the prophets. Jesus is better than the angels. Jesus is better than Moses. And then 3 weeks ago, Pastor Tank introduced us to this concept in chapter 5. Jesus is better or greater than your priests, your Jewish priests. And he starts in on this concept, and Pastor Tank talked about this idea when he finished out his sermon about Jesus, about him opening the doorway, walking behind the curtain, paving a way for us to have direct access to God. And then he told a hypothetical story about me creeping into his bedroom. And I would just like to stress, that's hypothetical. Should any of you think that I'm going to do that to you, just hypothetical. So here we are. We leave that at the end of chapter 5. And then he stops and he goes, wait a minute. To talk about Jesus as a high priest, we're going to have to talk about the Melchizedekian priesthood. And he goes, I know what you're going to do. You're going to go to sleep. You're going to tune me out. He says, you're lazy Christians. And he stops and he gives this whole warning passage of chapter 6 of don't be lazy. It's dangerous. Don't do this. So he spends his whole time in chapter 6 really stressing the danger of being an immature Christian. And then he says, now, we're ready to go. Let's go back to Hebrews. Let's go back in Hebrews to this concept of Jesus being our Melchizedekian priesthood. Now, I know you all. I know you're not lazy. I believe that you can hang in here as we talk about the word Melchizedek today, and you're not going to tune me out. I believe in you. And so hang in here with me. This passage is involved, but we're going to put our big boy pants on together, and we're going to deal with some theology here in Hebrews chapter 7. So I got 2 points for you today. Both are reasons why you should leave your inferior priests in the past and focus on Jesus, your perfect high priest. Jesus is a better priest. And so 2 things for you today, and the first one is simply this. Jesus belongs to a better priestly order. Leave behind your inferior priests. Jesus belongs to a better order of priests. All right, to do this, we first of all have to pick up the last 2 verses of our text from last week, because he's getting back to Melchizedek here. So look at verse 19 of chapter 6. If you have a scripture journal, on page 24. If you don't, we're in chapter 6, verse 19. All right. He says, we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now, here's what you need to understand here. This is tabernacle language. He's bringing us right back to Melchizedek, and he's bringing us right back to the Old Testament Levitical priests, the concept he left a chapter ago to give us this warning. He's coming right back here. Now, this tabernacle, you have to understand, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish tabernacle, remember it was first a tent, and then later on, Solomon built a temple, a permanent structure. But the tent had within it an outer wall of a tent and then an inner tent. And in the inner tent, there were 2 parts. There was the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And the inner tent was split by a curtain, divided by a curtain. And inside the back part of it, the Holy of Holies, the tabernacle sat. And that was where they understood the presence of God to be. That was the intersection of heaven and earth. And when the priest, high priest, was the only one who could go there, and it was such a threat for him to be into the presence of God, he had to atone for his own sins, They were afraid. They tied a rope to his foot in some generations of priests so that if he did something wrong and if he was struck dead, they could pull out the body so they didn't have to risk being in God's presence and dying themselves. This is how holy and significant the presence of God is. And so when the text says we have a hope in that inner place, nobody had a hope in there. That was terrifying. We have a hope. Why? Because Jesus went in as a forerunner on our behalf. I can think of no better illustration of a forerunner than Chicago Bears great Bronco Nagurski, which I know you were thinking of, hey, like, what's a forerunner? That's a forerunner right there. Bronco Nagurski is maybe one of the greatest fullbacks in Chicago Bears history. We might have to go back 100 years to find great Chicago Bear players. That's true, but we'll take what we can get, right? Just contrary to fact, I never saw him play, okay? I don't know how old you think I am, but I never saw him play. But here's his job as a fullback was this. Occasionally, the fullback would get the ball and run, and he was pretty good at that. But one of the jobs of a fullback is to help pave the way for the running back. So the ball is handed off, the running back gets the ball, the offensive line opens up a hole, the running back takes the ball, and he's supposed to shoot through the gap. Of course, the defense has put a linebacker there who will meet him in that gap and tackle him. The job of a fullback is to run ahead of the running back, take on the linebacker, and pave the way for the running back to make his way through. A forerunner. Jesus is Bronco Nagurski. He runs ahead of us. He runs into the temple and he takes the curtain. When Jesus died, the New Testament writers note that the temple was torn. The veil, that curtain, was torn from top to bottom. God separated. Jesus ran through. He's a forerunner. He allows us to go right into the presence of God. Any Jewish reader who was reading this would go, yeah, okay, I'm on board. Jesus is our priest. He's our forerunner. He goes in. I got a problem, though, author of Hebrews. My problem is that Jesus can't be a priest. Because to be a priest, we all know, now you don't know this, but they all knew, we all know that Jesus has to be of the tribe of Levi. He's got the wrong genetics. Jesus is of the tribe of Judah. He's not of the tribe of Levi. What's more, he would have to be a descendant of Aaron within the tribe of Levi to be a high priest. And Jesus has the wrong genetics. He cannot be our high priest. And so the author of Hebrews says, well, actually Jesus is from a different priestly order. He's not a Levitical priest. He's a Melchizedekian priest. Oddly enough, Microsoft Word recognizes the term Melchizedekian as a valid word. Who knew? I thought that would come up in my spell checker for sure. Whatever. Sorry, sometimes I say things. Why did I say that? Melchizedek, he's from a different order. He's not genetically from Levi. He's not genetically a descendant of Aaron. He's genetically of the tribe of Judah, a son of David, so he can be king. Interestingly enough, Jesus fulfills all three offices of Old Testament Israel. They had three offices: prophet, priest, and king. Jesus is all three, and he's the perfect of all of them. He's a priest. So the writer is going to tell us that Jesus was from a different priestly order. All that gets us to our text today. Chapter 7, verse 1. I want to read just the first 4 verses to start with here. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, he met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything. He is first, he's talking about Melchizedek here, he is first by translation of his name. His name literally means king of righteousness. And then he is also literally king of Salem, shalom, which means peace, king of peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son, he continues as a priest forever. And then he says in verse 4, see how this great man was to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. So the writer of Hebrews is going to pull out this passage from Genesis chapter 14. If the writer of Hebrews is writing around the turn of the millennium, and Abraham lived 2,000 years before that. So he's going back in history 2,000 years before the beginning of the Jewish nation. Just at the beginning, the very first Israelite was Abraham. He's their father. A whole was born out of him. And so he's going to go back to this passage in Genesis about Abraham before he's got kids, before he's got anything yet. And in Genesis chapter 14, Abraham has just embarked in a battle. It was the battle of the 9 kings, which sounds like Lord of the Rings, but it was really just Genesis. The battle of the 9 kings. 4 kings took on 5 kings. The 4 kings beat the 5 kings, and they took Abraham's nephew Lot captive in that process. So Lot is held as a prisoner, and Abraham gets word of this. Now you have to understand, in that day, Abraham was powerful and wealthy, and he had all kinds of servants, and his household was big as a nation itself. So he grabs all the men of fighting age and ability in his household, and he goes down, and he takes on the 4 kings, and he wins. And he rescues Lot, and in the process, he gets the spoils of the 4 kings and the 5 kings that they took everything from. He's got a lot of stuff. And he comes back, and on his way home, he runs across, it's just like random in text. He runs across a guy named Melchizedek. I'm going to just read to you out of Genesis 14 here. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Whoa, wait a minute. You can't be a priest of God Most High unless you're of Levi, and Levi hasn't even been born yet. He's priest of God Most High. Verse 19, and he blessed him, and he said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. The Levitical priesthood would not be founded for another 600 years. And yet here we have a priest of the Most High God. And the father of the Jewish nation paid tithes to him. And this priest has no genealogy. We don't get it. I mean, did he have a dad? Yes. Did he have a mom? Yes. That's not the point. The point is, the text gives us no indication of any of that. This is not a genetic priesthood. This priestly order of Melchizedek is something else. There's no order or genealogy. There's no beginning or end. We're not told his birth story or his death story. This reminds the author of Hebrews of Jesus. Now, look what he says about this. Look at verse 5. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though they're also descended from Abraham. So a Levitical priest looks around, and where does he get his tithes? He gets them from his brothers, the other people in his nationality, genetically related to him. Okay? But this man, verse 6, who does not have his descent from them, receives tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had the promises. It's beyond dispute now that the inferior is blessed by the superior. So the superior person gives the blessing, and Abraham is going to someone for a blessing, so that means Abraham, the inferior, is going to the superior Melchizedek. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men. So in Levite, he's getting tithes. The Levites, mortal men, are receiving the tithes. But in the other case, Melchizedek, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. He's got no beginning or end. One might even say that Levi himself, who received tithes, pays tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor Abraham when Melchizedek met him. All right, so this is where I was afraid you're going to get lost, because it's all about genetics. But here's the point, okay? It's a better priestly order. He's not of the Levite order. He's of the Melchizedekian order, and that order is better. Levitical priests take tithes from other Levites, their genetic brothers. Melchizedek takes tithes from Abraham, the father of all the nation. Melchizedek accepted from them the father of the Israelites, even though they weren't his genetic brothers. In fact, Melchizedek is superior to Levi because Levi's forefather Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. So in effect, his son Levi, through the genetic order, paid tithes to Melchizedek. So if you're concerned that Jesus isn't of Levi, don't be. Because Melchizedek is actually a better priestly order. We have another priest. Jesus can indeed be our high priest of a different order. Not only is Jesus part of a different order of priests, he's part of a better order. Pick up in verse 11 here. Now, we're going to see the word perfection. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about the priests. So here we are. The key point here is that perfection was never attainable through the Old Testament. It just wasn't. You could not go through a Levitical priest and be perfect. And that's what these Jewish Christians, that's what they're being tempted. They're being tempted to go back to this. And he goes, perfection's not even possible. You can't even do it. Another priestly line is needed. So to these Jewish Christians, he's saying, don't go back to the old. You're trying to save. You will try to be saved if you go backwards through an inferior priestly line. You need a better one. See, Jesus is a better priestly order. The Melchizedekian order is better than the Levitical order. And Jesus is part of the Melchizedekian order. For these Jewish Christians, this was like mind-blowing. They hadn't thought of this. How could Jesus be my priest? He's part of a better order. That's how he can be your priest. You see, Jesus is a perfect high priest. Stop looking to inferior ones. This takes us to our second point. Not only is Jesus part of a better priestly order, it's greater. Jesus is also just in general a better high priest. Starting in verse 15 through verse 26, we're going to see Jesus is a better high priest. Now, the role of the high priest, of course, in Leviticus chapter 9, Moses tells us the role of the high priest is to take in tithes from the people and to represent the people before God. And he's going to talk about like 4 ways within this that Jesus is a better priest. Now, I told you I had a 2-point sermon today, and some of you go, no, you got 4 more points. So do I have a 5 or a 6-point sermon? Maybe. But here we go. We got 4 sub-points. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. We're going to look at each section, and we're going to see how Jesus is a better high priest. The first note is Jesus is the basis of a better hope. All right, let's look at verse 15. He's the basis for a better hope. Now, this becomes even more evident. Oh, I'm losing a battery. That happens, from time to time. But the good news is I'm loud, and I can talk and do something at the same time, maybe. But I'll give this to you here. While you do that, I'll just talk loud and you all can hear me. I know you can. Sometimes our sound guys have wondered, why do we even mic Dave? Like, he doesn't need gives him special abilities. We're back. Verse 15. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. Then he's going to quote Psalm 110. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. He's finding evidence for this in the Old Testament. He's not just making it up. He saw it in Genesis 14. He goes, hey, this is quoted in Psalm 110 as well. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. A better hope. So in Psalm 110, he's going to quote this because King David, God says this to King David in Psalm 110. He says, you're a priest. And God knows in Psalm 110, David living way after Moses, that David is of the wrong tribe, that he can't possibly be a priest, but he calls him a priest by the order of Melchizedek. And if David's a priest of the Melchizedekian order, Jesus is a descendant of David, so it all works. It all makes sense here. And so he dives into Psalm 110 and he says, David had the same problem here. But Jesus, this Melchizedekian order, has a better basis. It has a better foundation. The foundation isn't genetics. It's not a legal requirement. Melchizedek had neither beginning or end, it says, like in the text. Right? There's no genetics listed. Jesus had neither beginning or end, literally. There was never a time when Jesus did not exist, because he's God. He existed before the incarnation. He exists after the incarnation. He exists through death, through his resurrection, and he's alive today. That makes him a better priest. It gives us a better hope. Jesus is the basis of a better hope. Now in verse 20, he's going to tell us our second thing here, that Jesus is the guarantor of a better contract. He's the guarantor of a better contract. Look at verse 20. And it was not without an oath. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. He's talking about the Levites there. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, now he's going to quote Psalm 110 again, and this time he goes, I need some context. Let me look at the phrase before that I left out. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. The basis of that very passage is the Lord's oath. The Lord is the guarantor of a better contract. That's verse 22. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better contract. Now, all right, if you have ever gotten a loan of any kind, you know that something has to guarantee that loan. If you get a mortgage in your house guarantees it, right? If you get a car, the car itself guarantees the loan. There's a guarantee that's put up. If you can't have a guarantee for the loan, you need a cosigner. Someone who will come along and say, if you don't pay your bills, I'll guarantee it and I will pay it. It's a guarantor. That's someone who guarantees something. God has sworn an oath for the Melchizedekian priests. And he didn't do that for Levi. God became the guarantee. Jesus became the guarantee of a better contract. That's the word there in the text. It's the word covenant. A covenant's an ancient contract. It's a contract with the priests of the Melchizedekian order. The third thing that he's going to tell us then is Jesus is a better priest, not only because there's a better hope and a better contract, but because there's better terms of the contract. Look at verse 23. The priests were many in numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. So they had to be a lot of priests because they died. And when you're dead, it's hard to be a priest. All right. But he holds his priesthood. But he, speaking of Jesus, verse 24, but he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. consequently, he's able to save to the utmost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. I mean, this is a pretty simple and straightforward point. It's that there are better terms going on here. I used the word purveyor, and I was talking to Tank about this. I don't think you should use that, he said. He's probably right. But, what is a purveyor? It's not in the text, but a purveyor is an offerer. It's harder to say offerer. It's easy to say purveyor. Someone who offers terms. I went to the bank. I got a CD recently, and I asked, what are your terms? What terms are you offering? It's better than it was like a long time ago. They're terms. They said, if you do it for this long, our terms are this amount. These are the terms we're offering. If a purveyor is someone who offers something. We often use the term a purveyor of goods and services, someone who offers something. So, if you're a purveyor of coffee beans, you might bring in wholesale coffee beans and sell them to local shops all in the area. You're a purveyor of something, an offerer, a giver. Jesus offers better terms. What are his terms? Well, his contract's got better terms. They're eternal. Like a Levitical priest gives you a lifetime maybe. That's pretty good. Lifetime. I mean, wow, someone offered you lifetime terms. You'd think that's great. Jesus got one up on that. He's offering you eternal terms. All eternity. And because he defeated death and he rose from the grave, his terms are solidified. He's alive forever. And then the fourth thing he's going to say is Jesus is a better high priest because he's the perfecter of a better sacrifice. Verse 26. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. Now he's going to give a whole bunch of words about Jesus. Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. It's a pretty great high priest. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sin, and then for the sins of the people, since he did this once for all, when he was offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of an oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. I mean, Tank preached this sermon 3 weeks ago, and he did such a great job of digging into this. But here's this simple idea. He's coming back to it. The priest, he has to offer up sin for himself, offer up sacrifice for his own sin, and then the sins of everyone else. And he has to keep doing it over and over and over again. But Jesus, because he was perfect, because he was one of us but not a sinner like us, his sacrifice that he offered for us one time, and it covers it all. It's perfect. He's the perfecter of a better sacrifice. So Jesus is a perfect high priest. Stop looking to inferior priests. Okay, let's bring all this down together now. So he's from a better priestly order than your priests. He's a better priest than your priests. That's the argument that the author's making. And at the beginning, you looked at me and you said, Dave, I don't have priests. I remember you told me that. Remember? I told you told me that? You said, well, I don't have a priest. What are you talking about, Dave? What are our modern priests? Because we don't really find a temptation to go back to Judaism. I mean, the Jews haven't had a high priest since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. They can't offer sacrifices anywhere but the temple, and the temple doesn't exist. So they haven't even had a functioning high priest. How are you, tempted to go back to that? Even if there was a high priest, our culture is so far removed from that, it's unlikely that any of us would feel the pull to return to submitting our connection to God through a Levitical priesthood. The Jewish priest, though, mediated a sinful and broken relationship with God. And the Old Testament assumes that the primary problem with human beings is that we are broken by our own sin. Priests looked to heal this relationship, even if it was temporarily. They looked to heal that. They were inferior, though, to the one true high priest, Jesus. So, we don't have these priests, right? I think we do. Because a priest mediates, I think you and I know intrinsically that something is broken and wrong with us. We know this intrinsically, and we're trying to find ways to bring healing and wholeness to this. And so you don't call your attempts to mediate your relationship with God, to heal your brokenness, you don't call those things priests, but you got plenty of them. At least I know I do as well. I think we do. What are ways that you look to another sinful, broken human being to find healing? What are ways that you do that? Okay, we got a lot of doctors in our church. I'm grateful for each one of you. I know all our doctors are going to be shaking their head yes when I'm talking about this right now. Because we go to our doctor and we say, Doc, I got something wrong with me. I need a pill. Give me a pill that will magically fix this, right? Do a surgery that isn't painful and has no ramifications at all and fix me instantly, Doc. I'm coming to you. And the doc, I know you all, you look down and you're like, well, so here's the thing. What's wrong with you? It's not something a pill fixes. What's wrong with you is the fact that you're going to die. Because we're all going to die. And your body is broken, and it's going to break down more. And even if I temporarily fix something now, something else is going to get you later. Like, this is the reality of the truth. Do we need doctors? Yes, we need them. I'm so thankful for our doctors. They are, I think, one of God's many graces to us as a society and as Christians, as individuals. Doctors are a blessing in so many ways. Can they fix what's really wrong with you? No. They can't. Death comes to all of us. See, you need a mediator of a more significant problem. A mediator doesn't just fix what's ailing in your physical body. What caused your body to break down in the first place? It is sin. It is the mess that we have. Now, there's this nuance. I'm going to list a bunch of things here. There's a nuance in all this because these mediators can be good things, but they're flawed things. They can't bring the healing we really need. How about financial gurus? Like, we look to our financial gurus to mediate the mess that usually we've created for ourselves, right? Like Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, Dave Bach. There's a long, long list of people that are our gurus. But for 95% of us, this wound is self-inflicted. Why? Well, you've got yourself into a massive debt pile because you coveted things that weren't yours 95% of the time. Can a financial advisor fix your coveting problem? No. Who can do that? You need a priest, a good high priest, a perfect high priest to do some mending in your heart. Podcasts. I think our podcasts are our priests sometimes. Like, there is a podcast for everything that you could possibly imagine. Anything you could possibly need, there's a podcast for. There's a podcast for things you don't need at all, okay? There's a podcast for everything. And like, some of you are like, taking notes and like, this podcast will fix my whatever. Help me be a better spouse, better parent, better coach, better boss, better leader, better friend, whatever it is. Where does all that problem come from? Try harder isn't going to solve it. How about nature? I think some of us make nature our priest. You're like, what are you talking about, Dave? Well, when God feels far, some of us retreat. I just need to be in nature. I just need to experience that glorious sunrise on a crisp spring morning when the deer is jumping and the animals there and the birds flying and I want to shoot it, and that will make me feel closer to God. I don't know. You can leave out the shooting thing, but we think, I feel closer to God. Is that what nature, is nature supposed to bridge and heal your relationship with God? Nature reveals to us truth about God, that God exists and he created it. Nature helps us glorify and worship God, the God who made all this. Praise him. Will nature heal your broken relationship with God? Will it draw you near and cover over your sin? No, it won't. Only Jesus can do that. Oh, I got a lot here. Okay. How about therapists? I am so grateful for our mental health therapists in this world, especially with this, the rise, and it's like a mental health crisis, right, in our world, and it's been well documented. And our mental health therapists are, in many ways, incredibly helpful. At Waukee Community Church, we believe in this. We have a partnership with Heartland Christian Counseling Services that it's just really great, and we just really appreciate that. But the problem is not what our therapists bring to the table. It's how we view our therapists and what they're supposed to do with us, right? I think the world in which we live has two incongruent ideas. Our culture seems to hold these two ideas simultaneously, and they can't be held simultaneously, but they do it anyway. Here's the two ideas. I am perfect just the way that I am. I am traumatized and broken. Two things that they hold simultaneously, the world around. And so, what do? I need fix. So I'm going to ask my therapist to be my mediator that fixes all of this what's wrong with me. But except nothing's really wrong with me because I'm perfect just the way that I am. You see the problem? A modern theologian wrote recently about this, a past decade, it's been like 15 years now, but she wrote this: I'm beautiful in my way because God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. Don't hide yourself into regret. Just love yourself and you're set. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. Thank you, theologian Lady Gaga. 13 years, that song's 13 years old. Wow. I mean, I'm perfect. Don't ask me I don't need any mediation. I'm great just the way I am, but I'm going to go see my therapist because a lot of bad stuff's happened to me, and none of it's my fault. It's all everybody else's fault, and I need my therapist to fix it all. And your therapist will come to you and say, that's not my job. A good Christian therapist will say, my job is to point you to Jesus, and he's the one who can heal you. And so I'll ask you good questions, and I will dig into your life, and I will walk with you, and I will love you well. But Jesus is the one who fixes this, not me. I'm so grateful for our therapists that are walking through with people and pointing them to Jesus. But the reality is, in most of the secular world around us, people are going, I don't need fixing. I just need someone to listen to me and tell me that, yeah, you have been traumatized and you should just stay in that forever. And Jesus says, I don't want you to stay in your brokenness. I want you to forgive. I want you to find healing. I want you to move beyond it. I'm so grateful for our mental health professionals that look to Jesus and are pointing people in this direction. What needs to change is not them, it's us. What are we expecting? We're expecting to see Jesus, because Jesus is our perfect high priest. So stop looking to our inferior priests. So what is your priest? How are you trying to find healing and wholeness? Are you trying to find it in someone or something that was never designed for that? Or are you looking to Jesus, our perfect high priest? He's better. Jesus is better than any priest you could have. He's better than any of the ones to which we typically look. He's better than people. He's better than things, because only he can meet you in your pit of despair, and only he can set your feet on solid ground, and only he can bring healing. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you that you are better. You are. You're better than anything that we can come up with. Anything that we think will solve all our problems and meet all our needs, Jesus, you're better. In our brokenness, we come to you and we say, thank you for the gifts you've given me in this world. But Jesus, we need you to heal our heart. You're better than anything that we could come up with. Because you are perfect. A perfect priest by the order of Melchizedek. Thank you for your goodness and greatness. In Jesus' name.